If you're trying to design systems to help improve the health of all Americans, you look at the people who are struggling most, and it's low-income people in this country who don't have good access to, fruits, vegetables, healthful foods, who don't have access to parks for their children to run around and play, educational access, those things. And so getting those people just kind of like baseline access, right? Housing access for safe housing. So I don't know if a $25 minimum wage would do it. I'd have to see data on that, but it's definitely getting resources to people so that they can have baseline health insurance, they can have baseline food access, they can have baseline safe housing, so that they can experience health as well.
Dr. Knurick, where does this podcast find you?
Denver, Colorado.
Let's bust into our first question, and it's a big one. What, in your view, is the state of public health in America?
I would say the state of public health in America. So I think, and this is, I'm sure we'll talk about, the MAHA movement and how that's kind of like defined the conversation around public health right now. But I got into this field about 15 years ago, and my main goal and my research focus was really chronic disease prevention, because even at that time, you could look around and look at the data, and it was very clear that we had done a really wonderful job at tackling infectious disease and getting a public health infrastructure in place that undoubtedly impacted our health in wonderful ways, right? We saw a huge increase in life expectancy because of a lot of our public health infrastructure. But as we were living longer, we were also seeing higher rates of chronic disease. And so we were particularly lifestyle-related chronic diseases, which is what I started my research focus in. And so what I would say is right now what we're looking at is a situation where about half of Americans are living with at least one chronic health condition, and many Americans, 30% of Americans, are living with, more than one. So many different chronic health conditions, and a lot of those are lifestyle-related chronic diseases, right? And what that means is our diet, our physical activity, our behaviors are impacting our disease risk. And so I think that what a lot of people in public health right now, or in kind of this MAHA movement right now, are really getting right is that we do have a big issue with these lifestyle-related chronic diseases. And so what I would say is when we're thinking about public health are really these systems that are looking at the health of all Americans. And when you're looking at the health of all Americans, the health of Americans is struggling. It's not struggling evenly across the board. What we see are pretty large health disparities in America, and we can kind of talk about that. But a lot of our health issues are really disproportionately affecting particular groups in America. But we are seeing these big health these big health issues in our country that I think that people are rightfully concerned about.
You've said that behaviors are important, but behaviors basically influence outcomes within the system. Talk about some of those systems in the U.S. that make bad behaviors even worse in terms of their outcomes.
Yeah, what I would say is individual behaviors. So we make individual choices within systems. And so those systems can either be set up for the most people to succeed or for the most people to fail. And what we have done in our country is really built systems for the most people to fail from a health perspective. Because, and there's a reason for that, because we have really built our systems for profitability. So if you think about if I'm working with you one-on-one on your health, some of the things that we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about your diet, right? What foods are you eating? Your physical activity. Are you moving around? Your healthcare access, your stress levels, your sleep levels. Those are all things we would work on an individual level. Where public health plays a role is there's systems that are impacting each of those kind of individual choices you're making. So just from the food system, for example, which is kind of my bread and butter, the food system in our country, by some estimates, is about 70% ultra processed food right now. And so we are heavily reliant in the United States on these prepackaged ultra processed foods. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's really because our food system has been built over the course of several decades for profitability. So from our agricultural system, which is where the food system starts, what we grow, to what we end up marketing and putting on shelves and marketing to people, has all been kind of designed for maximum profitability and growth. So in the 70s, we kind of changed our agricultural policies to start really focusing in on these commodity crops. And so, Secretary of Agriculture at that time, he had this go big or go home kind of like model. And the idea was we wanted to start growing in mass these commodity crops, mostly corn, wheat, and soy, because we grow corn, wheat, and soy very well in this country. And they're really good exports for us. And so we make a lot of money from them. And so that's what started happening. And so we started kind of coming away from small local farms, small family-owned farms, to large agribusiness. And that really dominates our agricultural system now. And so, we grow. We subsidize that as a government too. So we really incentivize farmers to be growing these commodity crops, and that's kind of decimated local food systems. And so when we did that, then we kind of came into the 1980s and the era of deregulation under Reagan, and then, Clinton as well. And the idea was, we're going to, you had the shareholder value movement, which was kind of like, let's maximize profitability and growth at the expense of all other values. And so one of those values is the health of the food that you're creating, right? And so when you do that, when you have all these like confluence of factors, you create a food system that is really built for corporate profit. So you are heavily reliant on these prepackaged ultra processed foods that can travel far because you don't have good local food systems. You said my husband's from Romania, so I'm very familiar. We go back most summers, and I'm very familiar with kind of like the food systems in a lot of countries in Europe, and it's just very different than what we have here. I'll walk down the street with my mother-in-law and go to the local farmers market, which is not what we consider farmers markets in the United States. It's just the market, which is like where everybody goes for their produce from like local farms that are around there. And it's much cheaper actually than to go to the actual grocery store, which is very different than here. I live in Denver, so we have farmers markets, but they're incredibly expensive. And they kind of, they sell like goods and things like that. So we kind of did away from these local food systems. And so when you do that, you are heavily reliant on these prepackaged foods, which require, by the way, food additives to keep them shelf stable. And for corporations, food corporations that are trying to maximize profit under this kind of system, they're going to swap and use cheap ingredients. So, for example, we subsidize corn in this country. Now, a lot of that corn doesn't actually end up in our food system. A lot of it goes towards animal agriculture and then fuel. But because we subsidize corn, high fructose corn syrup is quite cheap for us as a sugar source. This is just one example versus cane sugar. So what these food corporations did was they started using high fructose corn syrup as their sugar source. For the only reason for that was because it was cheaper, not because of any other reason. But they were trying to maximize profits, and so you do that by cutting cost of ingredients. And so what we have designed, kind of intentionally with policy, has been this food system that is not really conducive for our health, but it's conducive for corporate profits. And then you can go across the board, Scott, and you can look at, you can look at physical activity, you can look at stress, you can look at sleep, and all of the systems that have been designed, just thinking of like physical activity. If you think of the built environment, I mean, in our country, we really designed roads and systems for the profitability of the automobile industry. And so we have lots of towns and cities that aren't walkable and bikeable, which is very different than a lot of European countries, for example. And so that's kind of through a public health lens, is looking at those systems that are really impacting our individual choices.
I want to put forward a couple of theses that beg potential solutions and just have you respond to them. And I'm very comfortable with pushback, recognizing that you're the expert here. And I do think that we need to bring expertise back in vogue. One, this is really just about money. Chinese companies are run for control. U.S. companies are run for profits. European companies, sort of a hybrid between profits and what they think is potentially good for people. And there's downsides. We grow faster. We grow shareholder value faster. There's real benefits to having a robust economy. But at the end of the day, isn't the primary, if you were to look at people's health outcomes, doesn't it mostly, if you were to try and find something it's correlated to, doesn't it mostly come down to money? And because I'm wealthy, am I not going to live 10 years longer than someone who is in the lowest decile? Which begs the question, it's not romantic, it's not sexy, it's expensive, but would we move the needle a lot more than, say, MAHA or subsidies if we said $25 an hour minimum wage? If we just gave poor people who have the worst health outcomes the money such they didn't have to have two jobs, they didn't have to find the cheapest calories available, which is usually at a a Wendy's or a McDonald's? Doesn't at the end of the day, like everything else, this come down to money?
Yeah, the main predictor of health in this country is wealth. So you're absolutely spot on. There's evidence to show, there's research to show that, there's a 15-year life expectancy age gap for men and a 10-year life expectancy age gap for women between the highest and lowest income brackets. And you can look at sometimes more than 15 if you look at some of the research that looks at zip codes in the same state, and you'll see an even bigger disparity in terms of life expectancy. And so, yeah, 100% when we're thinking of like, how can we help the people who are struggling most? I mean, not just life expectancy. If you think of all of the lifestyle related chronic diseases, they are disproportionately impacting the lowest income people in this country. Diabetes rates are over twice as high, 5 times more likely to report poor or fair health than higher income groups. And so, if you're trying to design systems to help improve the health of all Americans, you look at the people who are struggling most, and it's low income people in this country who don't have good access to, fruits, vegetables, healthful foods, who don't have access to parks for their children to run around and play, educational access, those things. And so getting those people just kind of like baseline access, right? Housing access for safe housing. So I don't know if a $25 minimum wage would do it. I'd have to see data on that, but it's definitely getting resources to people so that they can at least have a baseline a baseline kind of, they can have baseline health insurance, they can have baseline food access, they can have baseline safe housing, so that they can experience health as well.
It strikes me, though, I've read somewhere that we spent $1.5 trillion on obesity-related illnesses or obesity-related conditions. That this is just, I used to think we're an addiction economy, or we're an attention economy. Now I'm convinced we're an addiction economy, and one of those addictions is to food because there's so much money in it. But what do you think of the idea, or like, well, first off, thoughts on public policy to address it, and a simple idea that probably doesn't work. What if we just massively increase the availability and penetration of GLP-1 drugs?
I think, first of all, let me address just like the food environment aspect in terms of policy. I think that if we're looking at why we have this abundance of food, I mean, we have way more calories available to us than our ancestors did, even like a generation ago, 2 generations ago. We have about 4,000 calories available for each person that is alive today in the U.S., and that's a lot of calories per person. We don't need that many calories. And the reasons for that are these food corporations are, they're trying to stand out in a system that where we already have too many calories available per person, right? And so they do that by innovating and coming up with, a different color product or a different, whatever it is. And so, you go into one of these supermarkets and there's just thousands of products. I mean, it's really unnecessary, right? We don't need that many food products on our shelves. But they're doing it because they're trying to maximize profits. And so, some of the ways that you can counteract some of that is through regulation, and which is funny enough. Like right now, we're going through again, we have an administration that's quite deregulatory in their approach, which is interesting for people who want a better food environment. But you would regulate marketing, particularly to children and low-income populations who are most impacted by some of this stuff. But just in general, you would regulate marketing. And one of the reasons we also have it is because we have very few corporations that own the majority of the food supply. And so they kind of get to, and that was because, kind of this deregulatory era where there were a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And now, you think that you're getting a product that's a different brand, but it's a brand that's owned by the same company and you wouldn't even know it. Right. So I think that some of the ways we do this is kind of we regulate marketing, we regulate, the amount of food that, or the types of foods that are allowed to be put on the shelves, or those types of things. And then, but it's also just like deeper. You have to change the entire food system because again, we have a food environment that's about 70% ultra processed foods. You have to incentivize it, starting at agricultural policies, incentivizing smaller farmers, incentivizing, through, we have the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which helps low income people get access to foods. And we have some really cool programs with that are called like Double Up Bucks, which a lot of states have, which is basically like if you spend your money on fruits and vegetables, you get twice as much. So you basically like double the amount of money that you have. And so we have these cool incentive programs that kind of incentivize people to eat more like nutrient dense, health promoting foods. So those are some of the strategies to be able to expand access. You have to address food deserts to expand access to kind of low income populations. And then on the other side of it, if you're just thinking of the obesity side and increasing GLP-1 drugs, I think that GLP-1 drugs, I think they are amazing in terms of what they have been able to do and the potential that they can have in terms of improving people's health. I am somebody who likes to think of more like root cause and fix the underlying systems before thinking of treating with a pharmaceutical med. I think there's definitely a place for pharmaceutical meds, but I would like to spend more of my time focused on like how can we fix the systems that are putting people in these positions versus just treating on the back end.
You said the Make America Healthy Again movement gets the problems right, but the solutions wrong. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I talk about the Make America Healthy Again movement, I mean, I sound very similar to them when I'll speak about kind of the problem. They do get the problems largely correct, right? We do have a lifestyle related chronic disease issue in this country. We do have a food environment that's built for profitability and not people's health. And we have systems in this country that are not designed for us to succeed. Where they get where we kind of diverge is in the causes of those problems. So their causes largely kind of play into this rhetoric of it's a very conspiratorial, anti-science, anti-regulatory agency rhetoric, which is you can't trust, our regulatory agencies. You can't trust scientists because apparently scientists are the ones who have gotten us here. And they kind of like distract from all of the issues that I'm talking about right now. They distract from, the idea that all of the reason that we're here is kind of the logical conclusion of the system that we've built, which are these systems that have been designed, again, for profitability at the expense of people's health. And I think when you do that, when you kind of just focus on like the problem is toxins in our food supply and you just choose random ones that don't have it's not as if we have strong evidence behind some of these that they're choosing. You get solutions like swapping the color of Fruit Loops, right? Or swapping high fructose corn syrup for cane sugar in Coca-Cola. And those just aren't going to move the needle on health. And so they're very distracting from the policies that actually could be moving the needle on health, right? If you swap red dye 40 out of Skittles and you add in Carmine or beet juice instead, like a natural food color additive, and it's still Skittles, right? It's still a very low nutrient, high sugar, ultra processed food that we should probably be consuming less of, not necessarily none of, but less of. Same with Coca-Cola, same with swapping beef tallow out and putting in, seed oils in fast food French fries. Like none of these things are going to actually change our food environment and actually make a meaningful difference on public health. And so it's very much a distraction. And what I'll say is that if you get the problems wrong, you're going to get the solutions wrong. And so some of those solutions I just highlighted, which is what MAHA is really talking about. Some of the other solutions that you'll do is say, things like, fluoride in the water is the problem, and that's causing all of our chronic disease issues. And so we're going to remove fluoride. Well, at the same time, dental cavities or dental caries are the number one chronic disease in children. So if you're trying to improve chronic disease in children and you remove fluoride, which is directly going to increase the number of dental caries, that is a solution that is going to actually cause more harm than good in terms of what our evidence actually shows. And so that's the danger in kind of misdiagnosing the problem, and then your solutions that follow are going to be problematic.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Support for the show comes from Betterment. We all have goals in life. Maybe you want to start a business, maybe you want to start a family, or maybe you want to throw a couple of pairs of socks in a frame pack and travel around the world. Whatever your hopes and dreams are, Betterment can help you save and invest to get there. Betterment helps people and small businesses put their money to work. They automate to make saving simpler, optimize to make investing smarter, and build innovative technology backed by financial experts. Whether you're saving for retirement, a down payment on a house, or your kids' education, Betterment's goals-based outlook helps you ground your financial decisions in your actual life. Their globally diversified portfolios help give you a solid financial foundation in turbulent times, and their tax-smart features can help you save money. So, if you want to stop worrying about how you're going to get there and start thinking about where you want to go, Betterment might be a good option. Don't just imagine a better future, start investing in one with Betterment. Be invested in yourself, be invested in your business, be invested with Betterment. Go to betterment.com to learn more. Investing involves risk, performance not guaranteed. Support for the show comes from LinkedIn. We say this all the time on our show, but it bears repeating. Running a small business isn't just a full-time job. It's about a dozen full-time jobs that you rarely, if ever, get to clock out of, at least until you get to the point where you can start hiring the dream team. And if you've made it that far, you already know there's no time to mess around. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share with your network, and get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. And LinkedIn's new AI feature can even help you write job descriptions and then quickly get it in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And if you decide you want to go to the extra mile to find the perfect candidate, LinkedIn says that promoted jobs get 3 times the number of qualified applicants. It's all these little things that let you find help fast without compromising on quality, which add up to you finally having extra time in the day for, I don't know, relaxing. Or, knowing my listeners, you'll probably use that extra time to expand your empire even further. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/prof. That's linkedin.com/prof to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. %40 of American households have some form of medical or dental debt. And I can't imagine the amount of stress that puts on households and shame, quite frankly. Me and my partner are working really hard and we can't afford to get our 19-year-old the root canal she needs. And we have to take on debt. And that amount of stress, which I imagine leads to worse health outcomes, and then you have a kind of a downward spiral. Do you believe that we should nationalize medicine?
Yeah, I mean, medical debt is also the number one reason for personal bankruptcy in the United States. Yeah, I'm a big advocate for some kind of universal healthcare system, some kind of system that gets everybody basic access to healthcare, and then we can have private insurance on top of that. Like companies can offer private insurance on top of that, but everybody should have basic access to healthcare, which is what every other industrialized country in the world does. And let me explain the reason for that, Scott. It's not just because I'm altruistic and just want everybody to have free things. Um, if you give people access to healthcare, they're going to go to preventive visits. And when that happens, they're going to be able to catch things early on. And so access to healthcare is one of our main determinants of health. There's an incredible amount of data on this. You give people access to healthcare, they get healthier. Not everybody, but on a mass scale, when you look at kind of the population as a whole, because they're going to go to preventive visits, they're going to go to screenings, and they're going to catch things before they get too down the line. When people don't have healthcare, what happens is, or they have healthcare that doesn't cover, these types of visits, or they have really high deductibles, and so they have healthcare, but they would have to pay out of pocket anyway for some of these visits. They're not going to go to the doctor. But the problem is that they're still going to get sick. It's not as if they're just not going to get sick because they don't have healthcare. And when they get sick, they're still going to go to the hospital. They're going to end up in the emergency room. And what we have is a lot of Americans using the emergency room as their primary care physician. And so they're ending up at the emergency room. And if you're in front of an emergency room having a heart attack, that hospital is going to accept you and they're going to give you care. And when you can't pay those medical bills, that cost is going to come on to us as taxpayers. So it's not like that cost just goes away. So, and it comes on to us with increased premiums in our health insurance, with increased hospital costs, with increased uncompensated care. So our tax dollars go to something called uncompensated care, which goes directly to these hospitals to compensate them for this uncompensated care. And so, not only is it problematic from a, money standpoint, but it's also problematic from a health standpoint. So if we can get more people access to healthcare, we're going to improve the health of those Americans and also decrease costs, because there's some good evidence to show that, in this country, we pay twice as much for healthcare and we have worse health outcomes. We've created a healthcare system that's very profitable for healthcare corporations at the expense of, again, people's health and people getting access to healthcare. And so you're going to improve people's health and you're going to lower costs.
So that's obviously a big solution, universal healthcare that may, if everyone else has done it, I'd like to think we could do it, but most people will say it would be very difficult to accomplish. Are there 2 or 3 policy solutions or private sector solutions that you think would move the needle?
Yeah, I think if you think of the main determinants of health, they are healthcare access, food access, income inequality, right? And probably income inequality is even above the other two. And so, when you think of policies that could actually help improve health, you have to look at, well, what are the main determinants of health, and then what are policies that could impact those? And so, if you're thinking of income inequality, it's some kind of solution that decreases income inequality, right? Which is the exact opposite that we're seeing right now, obviously, with the big beautiful bill. The big beautiful bill, I'm gonna like tangentially talk about this because it kind of counteracts everything I just said. If you think about income inequality and decreasing income inequality, it's exacerbating income inequality. If you think about expanding healthcare access, it's cutting nearly $1 trillion from healthcare access, from Medicaid specifically, which the Congressional Budget Office estimates 10 million people are going to lose access to healthcare. Now, they will argue that those people that are losing access to healthcare are, able-bodied people who should be working. There's just no evidence that 10 million people are able-bodied people who should be working. The vast majority of people on Medicaid who can work and don't have an exemption are working. And we again, I just kind of explained why we want to get more people access to healthcare regardless. The last one is food accessibility. And so, getting people more access to food is a big social determinant of health, and this cuts hundreds of billions of dollars from SNAP and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So that's really problematic right now. What we're seeing is kind of like it's antithetical to what we would want to see in public health. What I will say in terms of like policy-based solutions, it starts with overturning some Citizens United and getting money out of politics, because that and a lot of people don't kind of like put that together with the policies that are impacting our health. But the reason that we can't pass a lot of policy that are health promoting policies is because of kind of the corporate capture of some of these politicians, and there's not a lot of money on the front end in public health, and so in order to get something like universal healthcare passed or expanding access to some of these programs, the infrastructure bill that Biden passed was really a great thing, because it was looking at kind of the built environment and improving some of those systems. But it would be a lot easier if we could decrease the amount of corporate lobbying that was allowed at our political level.
What role do you think that social media has played specifically around the MAHA movement? Why do you think it's resonating so much? I keep getting served. I'm very into health, but I keep getting served a reel or a TikTok that's something along the lines of, look at this horrible thing that's in your food. It's also used in antifreeze. They scare the shit out of you. And then it always ends with, oh, and by the way you solve this problem and have better looking skin and longer erections is if you buy my supplement. And they're really elegant. They're well produced. It's from someone who is articulate and attractive. And you kind of, you can see how these are big businesses. And on the one hand, I love entrepreneurship. I love people having access to consumers to come up with ideas. On the whole, I think it's mostly a negative. And I'm curious, you put out a lot of interesting. I love it when you do these stitches where you listen to someone rant about something and then you come in and go, well, actually, no, there's no scientific proof whatsoever. Why do you think the MAHA movement is resonating? What role do you think online platforms play?
Yeah, I think the MAHA movement took the wellness influencer playbook that they've been using for, at least the last 10 years. A lot of my colleagues in the science communication space have been, combating some of this misinformation that's been on social media for years now. The MAHA movement, I think, saw the success of some of these influencers, particularly some of the ones that are high up in this MAHA movement, and really like honed in on those. I think that social media algorithms they really play into conspiratorial, fear-based information. That's what sells, and that's what spreads fast. So, I've done some videos or I stitch people who are like, are you poisoning your kids? And then they go into kind of like a single ingredient in a food item that's also found in like a cleaning agent at Home Depot or something. And that's supposed to be very scary. And I think they're relying on people's lack of kind of like chemistry knowledge, right? And scientific knowledge. Because we have, just think of baking soda, right? Baking soda is an ingredient that can be in chocolate chip cookies, or it can be used in some sort of cleaning agent, right? Baking soda is really great, or it can be sitting in your refrigerator in order to air it out, right? In order to make it cleaner. So it's got lots of different functions, and a lot of ingredients are like that. And so, if you rely on people to not really understand that, you can kind of manipulate their lack of understanding in order to then, on the back end, as you mentioned, most of the time sell you some sort of product, right? So I'm going to scare you, and then I'm going to sell you a product. And I think it just, unfortunately, the way that social media algorithms are is that that's what plays really well on social media. I mean, even myself, if I went online and I just started educating, I think that some people would watch it, but what I found is that it works a lot better when I show the video and then I reply to the video. And that's me kind of playing into social media algorithms because that's what works when somebody sees the misinformation and then I correct the misinformation. And so, unfortunately, I think social media takes most of the blame, to be honest. And then what happens is you get into an algorithm. You watch one or two of those videos and you get into an algorithm, and then that's all you see, and you don't have a chance. I can't tell you how many people, when I started making content really like targeted, really like combating some of the narratives coming out of this MAHA movement, because I just saw how manipulative some of the narratives were. How many people reached out to me in my DMs and said, I just never had the opportunity to hear another side to this. Like, this is literally, I've just seen kind of like what they're saying about all of these like toxins and all of this. And I've never heard like a scientist or anyone else talk about that. And, social media is great at that. It's great at dividing us and kind of putting us in our camps. And then you never really see the other side. So I think it takes a ton of blame.
What are your thoughts on how COVID changed the landscape?
I think COVID completely changed the landscape. And so, what's interesting about my field is wellness was really always kind of like a left leaning idea, like hippies in San Francisco kind of like started there. And then, people who really cared about the food supply and, small farmers and that sort of thing. And we've seen over the last 5 years, like this shift in kind of like wellness discourse that has really kind of moved from left to right. And so, again, like wellness is a bipartisan thing. Most of us want wellness, but I think the underlying shift that's happened is this distrust in regulatory agencies and distrust in science. And I think most of that, I think maybe there was a little of that before, but most of that in terms of like our everyday discourse, it really came from COVID. And I think it was kind of a confluence of COVID was, a novel virus that, we were dealing with a global pandemic. And so science was changing because that's what it does as new information was coming in. And I think there's a bit of a lack of, we don't, a lot of us want certainty. And COVID did not give us certainty, as particularly in the early days. And so I think as things shifted, it really just opened the door for a lot of kind of manipulative or conspiratorial narratives to kind of enter the fray. And then at that same time, social media was even getting bigger. TikTok was released like right before that, and it was huge at that time. And I think, those types of algorithms just started getting people into camps. I don't know that we would have seen the same kind of distrust and the same kind of like response that we saw during COVID if we didn't have social media, right? Because we've had, not to the same extent, but we've had kind of like these public health crises before, and we haven't necessarily seen the same thing. And I think a little bit of some of that definitely, like we as scientists, public health experts, communicators, need to take some blame, because I think there were mistakes made in terms of like communication at that time, and what was happening, and really just communicating that like this is what we know now. It could change because of when we get more information, but because that maybe perhaps wasn't communicated as best as we could, now looking back and seeing kind of like what we could have done, I think that it just really left gaping holes open for people to step in and just create conspiratorial narratives around it all. And that's why we've seen kind of this huge surge of people who just have complete distrust in our regulatory agencies, which MAHA really plays on really hard.
It seems as if a vessel for some of this distrust or rejection of science is focused on vaccines right now. What's happening in terms of mRNA research cancellations, and why do you think vaccines have become such a hotbed for controversy?
Well, RFK Jr. as the head of HHS is certainly part of that, right? RFK, he's for the last, at least 2 decades, he's kind of been in this anti-vax space. He started up the Children's Health Defense, which kind of in this anti-vax group. And that's his main coalition. It's really interesting, this MAHA movement. They kind of have two sides, two facets of the coalition. It's the hardcore anti-vaxxers who have been with RFK Jr. for years, who made up kind of his, when he was running for president as an independent, kind of like made up his coalition. And then they brought in kind of this more like the MAHA moms who are really worried about like the food additives and the toxins in our food supply and those types of things. And so they kind of like brought them together. And there's kind of been some, there's been some infighting in there, which is interesting. But I think on the anti-vax side, COVID obviously is part of that. And RFK Jr. and his anti-vax like colleagues are certainly part of it. And now, I mean, he's the head of HHS. HHS is the biggest public health agency in the entire world, and he's leading that charge. And so I think that that's why it's so front and center in public discourse, clearly. And what we're seeing right now, I mean, he canceled $500 million in mRNA vaccine research. mRNA is a technology that, the inventors of mRNA just won a Nobel Prize for it in 2023. If you talk to experts in this field about who are experts in mRNA, they will say that they believe it's going to revolutionize medicine. They believe it's going to do for the 21st century what antibiotics did for the 20th century. It's a very elegant technology where it speeds things up. And so maybe some people don't understand, but the reason that we were able to get the COVID vaccines out so quickly was because they had spent, a decade plus, 2 decades working on this mRNA technology. And so a ton of research had gone into it. And so when they identified the SARS-CoV-2, they were able to come out with a vaccine quite quickly for it, whereas, it would have taken years prior to that. And so, it's not just vaccines. It's not just, infectious diseases. It's also that they think it's going to revolutionize cancer, and potentially be incredible for cancer, like cancer treatments, and other like unknown diseases or not well-known diseases. And so I think that it's really problematic when he just cancels $500 million in the research. I mean, the research is the part that like, let's make things safer. Let's improve upon what we have. Let's see what else it can impact. And, this is research being done globally, and he canceled $500 million here in the United States, which, is there's an economic cost to that too. So we're basically giving up. We're the leaders in this research right now, and we're giving up kind of that leadership by canceling this research into mRNA vaccine technology. And so, and that's not all we're seeing with vaccines. We're seeing the entire CDC essentially being dismantled. RFK Jr. just fired the head of the CDC, several leadership positions. These are career scientists, some who have been at the CDC for decades, have resigned, saying that, RFK Jr. is not even listening to them at the CDC. It's really concerning that when you have an HHS secretary who is literally just not listening to career scientists and instead is kind of listening to his own group of people.
We'll be right back. Support for the show comes from Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to shop for your personal style. Follow us here, and you can invest in some new arrivals that you'll want to wear again and again, like a relaxed Prada blazer and Gucci loafers, which can take you from work to the weekend. Shopping from Saks feels totally customized, from the in-store stylist to a visit to Saks.com, where they can show you things that fit your style and taste. They'll even let you know when arrivals from your favorite designers are in, or when that Brunello Cucinelli sweater you've been eyeing is back in stock. So, if you're like me and you need shopping to be personalized and easy, head to Saks Fifth Avenue for the best fall arrivals and style inspiration. Support for the show comes from Shopify. If you run a small business, you know there's nothing small about it. Every day there's a new decision to make. Even the smallest decisions feel massive. But if you have the right platform, you can approach all of your decisions with confidence. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. Shopify lets you tackle all your important tasks in one place, from the inventory to payments to analytics and more. It makes the marketing minefield easy with built-in tools for running social media and email campaigns so you can find new customers and keep them. And if you're looking to grow your business internationally, Shopify has global selling tools to help you in over 150 countries.
Get all the big stuff for your small business right with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/ProfG. Go to shopify.com/ProfG. Shopify.com/ProfG.
We're back with more from Dr. Jessica Knurick. Where do you think that lack of appreciation for science and what feels to me just like naked incompetence, where do you think that manifests first? Where is that going to start to bubble up in terms of outcomes?
Science is it's an interesting thing because it's what has enabled us, the scientific method. It's just basically science is a way of understanding the world around us, right? It's not a set of facts that we say are like never going to change. It's a way of understanding the world around us. And the scientific method has enabled incredible advances in the last 150 years, a over doubling of global life expectancy in just the last 150 years. I just saw a clip from a few weeks ago of Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about this, and he put it beautifully. He said, for thousands and thousands of years, life expectancy was 30 to 35, up until about 150, 200 years ago, when all of a sudden it went up to, in the United States, about 78 right now, right? And that was because we have been able to create this really beautiful way to understand the world around us. It's not perfect; it has issues. It's not foolproof, and things change and we learn more. But it's a way that we are able to identify viruses, identify germ theory has enabled us to identify germs. And so, if we disregard the scientific method, we don't really have to look far to see what would happen, right? Because we lived that for thousands of years when we had people who kind of, treated through ideology, treated people through like what they believed to be true without necessarily having evidence. And outcomes weren't great. Again, 30 to 35 was life expectancy. That was certainly disproportionately like young people were dying of infectious diseases or lack of sanitation and those types of things. And so when we disregard science, what we're going to see are people dying because of it. Like to put it bluntly, we're going to see, if we have another pandemic, we're going to see a resurgence of some of these infectious diseases that haven't been around. I mean, we see it with measles right now in the measles outbreak. And as vaccination status decreases, we'll see these diseases that used to take a lot of lives and don't anymore resurge. And that's kind of the fear, is that if we stop investing in science, we will see consequences of not investing in science, and that we'll see diseases that we could have had progress on, we won't have progress on, right? And those are all really like strong concerns for us in the scientific community. And then there's an economic aspect to it as well, because we in the United States, we've always in a bipartisan way really supported scientific research, and NIH research, and that's kind of been a bipartisan thing. Right now, we're looking at Trump's 2026 budget. He wants to cut NIH funding by 40%. And if you do that, you are essentially like giving up what your standing in terms of scientific innovation in our country, and that obviously has problematic impacts for the economy.
What trends or technologies are you keeping an eye on right now? Is there anything that you think we're missing to the downside or the upside?
In terms of just public health?
What are you watching right now? What do you think has been underreported in terms of the impact it might have? Also, to the upside, is there anything you're really excited about?
I think what's being underreported and maybe like people aren't realizing how detrimental it might be are these attacks to science and what it's doing to young scientists. So PhD students, young career scientists, people in the medical field, medical doctors. We're seeing, I talk to every single day, like young stage career scientists who are looking to leave the country. We're seeing PhD programs that are not being funded, and so there are no spots for PhD students, and so they're having to look outside of the country. We're seeing like some of our best researchers in some of our fields leave the country. I mean, very excellent nutrition researchers that I know are moving to Canada, and just accepted positions in Canada. And we see some of these countries that are creating pathways for scientists. They're kind of capitalizing on brain drain that we're experiencing right now, and opening pathways to allow them to move to their countries. We see France doing it. We see Canada doing it. I think there's a couple of other countries that are doing it as well. And so that is very concerning to me in terms of we may lose because of funding, because of just like the overall feeling of how people are, first of all, there's a loss of funding. Second of all, there's this idea that, a lot of our medical doctors, people are coming in and just, yelling at them or not listening to what their advice is, or saying that they're paid off by big pharma and these types of things when, they get into this field to really try to help people. And I know of a lot of medical doctors who are thinking about leaving the profession. And so I'm concerned about kind of the downstream effects of that in, let's say, 10 years when we have far fewer scientists and medical professionals in the field. That's kind of one of the things that I think is being underreported. And I'm talking to people every single day who are talking about this, who are in these fields, who are thinking of either leaving science altogether or trying to leave the country and to go someplace else to do their work.
As a parent, what advice would you give to other parents in terms of where we get it wrong in terms of our own kids' nutrition?
I think right now, one of the things that I dislike so much about the social media aspect of all of this, and how these algorithms really like play into this conspiratorial fear-based nature, is I'm seeing a huge exacerbation of like just food anxiety, right? And like fear about like, what can my kids eat? What can I eat? And young parents are especially vulnerable targets, and so I feel like especially protective over them, because we just want to do what's best for our young kids, right? We just ourselves, but also our young kids. And so when I'm talking to them, if I were to give a piece of advice, it would be that the basics of what it are like from a health perspective, the basics that may go into somebody's health are, they've been long standing for decades, and they haven't changed a whole lot. So, try to emphasize like whole foods as much as possible. Try to get movement every single day. Try to have a good sleep schedule, those types of things. And those try to play with your kids. And those things are going to do a lot more than kind of looking at individual ingredients on a label or being scared to eat anything. And so that's what I want to really drive home in terms of messaging is just, you know, and that kind of goes to everyone in the country, like not just children. 90% of Americans don't meet fiber intake guidelines. Over 90% of Americans don't meet vegetable intake guidelines. 80% of Americans don't meet physical activity guidelines. If we can just focus on the basics, try to get more fiber rich foods, try to get a vegetable on your plate at most meals, try to move your body. The average American walks 3,000 to 4,000 steps per day. Try to get moving a bit more. That's going to have a way more measurable impact on your health than any of the things that we're spending 90% of our time on social media thinking about.
We've seen those studies where in China, the number one aspirational job for kids is astronaut. In the U.S., it's influencer. And I think of you as an influencer, and I mean that in a positive way. And I think a lot of people see your social media footprint, as I did, and think that's the right type of influencer. She's bringing substance, important topic, expertise, measured, thoughtful, and you're very compelling the way you articulate these things. How did you get here? I just want to know, what is your backstory? What led to where you are right now?
Yeah, so I have a PhD in nutrition science and I'm a registered dietitian. And I got into this field really, it was a long process, but my goal was really to look at chronic disease prevention. My grandpa died when he was in his 60s. He had type 2 diabetes, and um, he died of a heart attack while snowblowing in Michigan. And so that always had me thinking like how could we have helped him better? Because the what we heard from, and I was a kid at this time, so yeah, a teenager. But what we knew to be the case was that he just shouldn't eat sugar. And so what we would do is we would just find like sugar-free alternatives for him. And we would get so excited. We would find sugar-free brownies or sugar-free candy. And we would bring it to him and think that we were helping, and not realizing that that wasn't helpful at all. But we thought that what we were doing was the right thing, and so that just had me always interested in the kind of this idea of chronic disease prevention. And so when I went for my PhD program, I went into a program that was really interdisciplinary. So, I mean, the title of it is Physical Activity, Nutrition, and Wellness. And I really focused on the nutrition science side of that. But it was cool because we were able to kind of all work together and look at all of these factors that impacted health, and how to decrease health. And so, when I was looking at it, I was really focused on the individual. But when you get into the research, you kind of see, oh, we have really good data on what can prevent chronic disease, or at least lifestyle related chronic disease. But what we're missing is like behavior change. The behavior change data, it's very difficult to change people's behavior. And so when you kind of start looking at that data, it's impossible to not look at the systems that are impacting people's behavior. And so that's where my research led me, was just kind of looking at these public health systems that are really influencing us. And so I was a professor at the University of Nevada for a couple of years. And then my husband was in San Francisco at the time, and I was in Vegas, and we lived separately. And the only way for us to really get together, it was a personal choice. I left academia to join him in San Francisco. And, when I was a professor, though, I've told this story. I tried to go on social media. So this was 2016, and there was a new app out. And my little brother, convinced me to go on and just start teaching nutrition. He was like, "You're teaching in class, just go teach what you teach on this app." And so I did. And, I talk about this a lot. It was very frowned upon at that time for academics to go on social media. Like, that just was not what you did. And you probably can speak to this as well. It was, and I was a brand new tenure track professor. And so I did not want to, I didn't want to negatively impact my career trajectory. And I got comments from some of the professors in my department and some previous colleagues basically making fun of me and asking, like, what are you doing on social media? And saying, like, how's your blog doing?
I so relate to this. In a department meeting, I had a colleague say in front of all of my colleagues that Scott is the Kim Kardashian of academia, and he wasn't being kind. It outed you as someone who wasn't serious,
Right.
which wasn't the case. Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I mean, that was exactly my experience. And so I got off after a few months. I was like, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm a brand new professor. I want a career in academia. But I say that story to say that, like, I think we lost a lot of ground for years and years, particularly in the sciences. It was frowned upon for us to go to spaces where people were going for information. And so we started allowing kind of these narratives to be owned by people who didn't necessarily have the background to be talking about these topics. And so I think that did us a big disservice. I think that's changing now. It's not 100% changed, but it's changing now to be more accepted. And so anyway, I went into the startup world, and that's where I started working in science communication, and working kind of between PhD researchers and business people. And so I would act as kind of a translator. And so I honed some communication skills doing that, I think. And so when I came on social media in 2022 originally, I was pregnant with my daughter, and started, I just saw a lot of misinformation targeting pregnant people, and I was protective of them because I was one. And so I started kind of combating some of that misinformation. And then it was last summer that I started, when the MAHA movement kind of started, coming of age. I started to see, and I think it was just because it was my exact area of expertise. I was able to see whereas maybe I'm not in other areas of politics, exactly like how manipulative the narrative really was. And so I shifted my content focus to talk really about my area of expertise, which was nutrition science and public health. And yeah, my account has grown from there, and it's been quite the ride.
And if you were to sort of communicate, if there was one thing as we go into, well, the 26th election is way off, but if there's anything you would want to remind people, or if you wanted to distill your message down to one basic message you really hope that resonates with people, that they really contemplate on, what would that one message be?
I think it would be that health is bipartisan, right? And wanting a healthier food environment, wanting healthier systems is really bipartisan. And so we have to understand the problem and how we got here in order to understand the solution. And so I understand kind of the the desire to kind of just latch on to some of these like very simple, easy kind of conspiratorial narratives in terms of the toxins in our food environment, or this or that, or our regulatory agencies. But you have to understand why we got here, and then like let's solve the root cause of why we got here. And so I think this is really an opportunity for I think more people. One of the great things about the MAHA movement is it's gotten people who have never really thought about these systems and really never thought about public health before to be very interested in it. And I think that's a real opportunity for us as professionals to be able to, maybe for the first time, meet people where they are and explain these things, and talk to them about how we could improve upon our systems to make an environment that puts the most people in success, in a position of success in terms of their health. And so that's what, I guess, looking forward, what I'm hopeful about is that, I do think that there's a real opportunity here for us to change some things in terms of improving the systems in our country that on both sides of the aisle, many of us want to see, and changing those for the better for all of Americans.
It feels as if in our government we over-index, or at least our elected officials, we over-index on lawyers and business people and under-index on health professionals. Dr. Knurick, would you ever consider running for office?
People ask me that all the time, Scott. I have two young kids in their 5 and 2, and so I'm not considering running for office anytime soon. I think that I am in a position right now where I am able to maybe potentially do more help, or be more helpful in terms of just a communication role, than I would be kind of in a government office role.
Well, health is bipartisan is a fantastic bumper sticker. Dr. Jessica Knurick is a nutrition scientist, registered dietitian, and nationally recognized science communicator whose work spans nutrition, public health, and food policy. She's best known for breaking down health misinformation and making science clear and accessible. She joins us from her home in Denver. Dr. Knurick, in a world where expertise has been eroded, or that science denial seems to be hip and cool, there needs to be a resistance of thoughtful people that continues to bring science, data-driven solutions to a society. I think you are a gift. You combine substance. You are incredibly compelling. You have weaponized these mediums for good. And I'm just we're sincere about this. We want to be a weapon and a platform for spreading your accurate information. You really are, I think, a huge force of positive information that's really needed right now. Very much appreciate your work and appreciate your time today.
Really appreciate that. Thank you for having me, Scott.